All right, welcome everyone to the Safe Streets for All second public meeting for Cherokee County and the city's joint effort. We're glad to have you here and share some updates on our process and get your feedback throughout this meeting. We'll be doing some interactive polls during the meeting to hear from you all, and then we'll also be holding a Q&A at the end of the meeting. We do encourage, if you have questions throughout, please use the chat to put some questions for the team. If there's anything that you need clarification on, and it's a burning question, you're welcome to come off mute, but we would ask, if it's a question about the technical content, to hold that towards the end. Otherwise, we just hope that this is a respectful meeting. Please be respectful of other people's ideas, and we look forward to hearing from you. So with that, I will pass it over to the project manager, Kat, to kick off and start the meeting.
Thanks, Ansley, and good evening, everyone. Thank you again for taking time out of your busy day to join us and learn about this project. We really appreciate you being here, taking the time to give us a little feedback so we can really make this project customized for the needs of the community members. So just to give you a little context about what we're trying to do here today, of course, we're going to update you on our process, our analysis, and in particular, how we got to the proposed project locations that we're going to show you towards the end of the presentation. But really our goal is also to get your feedback. So there'll be an opportunity for discussion here during this call, but there's also some online tools on our project website. So we'll show you some QR codes later on the slides. So if you prefer to upload your comments that way, that's an option as well. So we'll go through our process update, get into our safety analysis, some policies and programs, particular, kind of programmatic and policy solutions for safety across the county. And then we'll dive into really the engineering solutions. So the project development and safety countermeasures. And finally, we will reserve some time at the end for your questions and answers. And we will be doing a little poll here. So if everyone is able to, if you're viewing this presentation on a laptop and you have a phone handy, you can go ahead and scan the QR code. If you happen to be viewing this presentation on your phone and you don't have a second device available to you, you can minimize us and go to your web browser and put in menti.com, MENTI.com, and then enter the code that you see on the screen here, 79264405. And we'll walk you through a series of questions here just to kind of understand who's in the room. And then we'll be using this poll again later in the presentation to give you an opportunity to vote and give some feedback that way. And if anyone has any issues getting access, feel free to drop a message in the chat. So our first question here, what is your relationship with Cherokee County? So do you live here, work here, visit, or maybe some other option? So far, I got mostly residents so far responding.
I'll go ahead and advance it. If anybody missed the question, feel free to enter in the chat if you were still answering.
And then let us know where you live. So which municipality you live in, or if you're in unincorporated Cherokee County. And this just helps give us a sense of kind of who we're talking to so that we can understand that in the feedback. So, if all of the feedback that we get is about Woodstock. It's helpful to know that everybody in the meeting here is from Woodstock. So that just kind of helps us understand the context around the feedback for after the meeting.
We'll have some more polls a little bit later on, but I'll let Kat take it from here on the process update.
Cool. Thanks, Ansley. So just a quick update on our schedule overall. We are in the process of doing our second public meeting here. We are targeting to getting a draft plan to Cherokee County around mid-December. The deadline to the Federal Highway Administration for this project is the end of March. So we're hoping that'll give plenty of time for review by county stakeholders, public, and then of course the Federal Highway Administration staff.
All right, I'll share some updates about the engagement. I apologize, I don't know if I introduced myself. My name is Ansley Belton. Been coordinating a lot of the engagement activities on this process. So I'm going to share what events we've been doing so far, as well as online input, and what are some of the key highlights we've heard. So to date, we've held 2 stakeholder committees with a robust group that consists of members of all of the local governments involved here, as well as Reinhardt University, Northside Hospital, the school district, several other organizations that are key stakeholders and could be implementation partners down the road. So during those meetings, I'll share in a moment some of their key input we've heard. Back in August, we had our first round of public engagement as well. Some of you may have attended. We had a virtual meeting as well as an in-person. And then throughout some of the spring and summertime, we held 2 online input opportunities. There was a traditional survey as well as a map-based activity. And we're going to be having another map-based activity that Kat will share a little bit more on how you can access that when we get a little further in the presentation. And lastly, we went out to the community at 3 different events to just try to raise awareness about our process and collect some input from different folks. And we were at the Canton First Friday in August, one of the farmers markets in Woodstock, and as well as your multicultural festival in Canton. So these were great opportunities to engage with a lot of people. So as I mentioned, I'll share what we've been hearing from our stakeholders that are really helping guide this process. One of the overwhelming themes that's come across is that growth has been something that Cherokee County is grappling with. And because of the fast growth that's occurred in Cherokee County, the infrastructure needs have not always kept up. So that's something that, you know, we've evaluated and also thought about, you know, especially with safety, how has that been left behind, and how can we make sure that in these areas that are quickly growing, safety continues or will be a priority in the future. We've also heard from stakeholders about their preferences for some ways to continue engaging on these safety topics after this process. And one thing they were very supportive of was an enforcement and engineering working group that can continue to stay abreast of best practices and try to brainstorm together on what strategies could be appropriate for Cherokee County. Some other things we've been hearing: speed management, several corridors that we'll go through a little bit later on that have been brought up again and again as places where speeding is an issue. Land development, like I was noting, the growth has had some issues, has led to some issues in some areas. Intersection control. And lastly, we've also heard from folks about the importance of making sure that education is a part of the strategy for how we can address safety comprehensively. at our first round of public meetings, we heard from folks about how they think the Safe Streets for All program should prioritize different needs, and improved infrastructure was the top voted strategy. But new laws and policies, as well as enforcement of existing policies, was something that we heard about, as well as the educational campaigns. So very similar input as to what we heard from stakeholders. In our community survey, we asked folks to rank different types of solutions, and this input you're seeing on the screen reflects the responses from 670 community members that took our survey. And from that input, we found that policy enforcement was actually rated the top type of solution. Surface condition improvements on our roads came in second, and then better visibility was also one of the top three. In terms of what folks perceive are some of the causes of danger, speeding and aggressive driving came out far and away the highest. Bad road intersection design was second place. And as I shared earlier, we also collected input via a map activity that asked for people to give input throughout anywhere in Cherokee County where they've noticed any safety concerns under these different categories. So bike and pedestrian needs, intersection and signals, rail and freight, roadway, and weather and lighting. As you can see here, the most popular topic was the intersections and signals. So that input really has helped to inform the project development that Kat will get into a little bit later on. This map, as well as this list, are a high-level summary of what kind of input we heard on that map activity. The darker the roadway, the more comments were received in the vicinity of that corridor. So Highway 140 was one of the most popular areas we heard about. Highway 92 was also pretty strong, as well as Arnold Mill Road and Mountain Vista Boulevard. So with that, I'll let Kat take you through some of the safety analysis and how that's informed the high injury network.
Yeah, so I'll get into our safety analysis here a little bit. Overall, there have been about 32,000 total crashes during our analysis period. So we looked at data from 2018 to 2022, so 5 total years of data. $500 total crashes per year. You'll notice there is a dip in 2020. This is consistent with national trends during the pandemic. A lot fewer people were commuting, going places in general. So overall trips were lower. But one thing you'll notice is the number of fatalities and serious injuries did not dip. So a lot of the driving behaviors, because the roads were not as congested, people were driving faster and driving with more dangerous behavior. And so those fatality and serious injury numbers did not drop. This is a trend that was consistent really across the country, not just with Cherokee County, but we're seeing that here. So, we're really focused on these fatalities and serious injuries, and you'll see that throughout our safety analysis here. These, about 11 to 23 fatalities a year, 55 to 102 serious injuries per year. You'll notice that serious injuries number is going up. So that's definitely a trend that Cherokee County needs to be aware of and continue to track after this program is through. Next slide. This chart here gives us a view of kind of who is most vulnerable to fatality crashes. So in the red that represents the percentage of fatalities that occurred during the analysis period. The blue represents the total number of trips by that mode. So, auto crashes represent 85% of fatalities, but almost 90% of overall trips. So the fatalities are slightly underrepresented. That trend is sort of flipped for heavy vehicle crashes, bicycle crashes, and pedestrian crashes, where the number of trips overall is actually quite small, but they're overrepresented with the fatalities, indicating that these modes are especially vulnerable to risky crashes. Next slide. We also looked at what types of crashes are more likely to result in a fatality or a severe injury. So again, the red shows the percentage of the killed or severely injured outcome crashes. Yellow is the minor injuries, and the dark blue is the total crashes. So you'll see the crash types that are highlighted here are the ones that are overrepresented with fatalities, i.e. they are more likely to result in a fatality than other crash types. That includes pedestrian crashes and head-on crashes in particular. Those are kind of the big two that we see here. And then also bicycle crashes, left angle crashes, and collision crashes that are not a collision with a motor vehicle. So that's often your roadway departures, hitting a light pole or a tree on the side of the road. Next slide. Lighting condition is another really big consideration for understanding safety. So the total crashes from dusk to dawn is about a quarter of the crashes in total. It's also about 37% of the killed and severely injured crashes. So again, you're seeing overrepresentation in that KSI category. The dark, not lighted crashes, so these are crashes that are happening during dark hours where there is no supplemental lighting, that represents about 13% of total crashes, but 25% of total KSI crashes. Of crashes that do occur at night, those in unlit conditions are much more likely to result in a KSI, especially for pedestrian crashes and crashes that are not a collision with motor vehicles. So when you look at those two crash types, those trends are even more pronounced. Next slide. So we took all of this analysis along with a lot more factors and are trying to put it into a digestible, subset of Cherokee County roads that they can use to prioritize where they are going to make improvements. So in order to do that, we looked at 10 criteria, the first 5 of which are on the screen here, to identify where the highest priority are, where is the highest risk and the biggest crash history based on, again, the past 5 years of crashes, the crash rate. So this takes into account not only the crash history, but also the volume of trips that are happening on those roads, the crash rate for killed and severely injured crashes, and then bicycle and pedestrian risk factors. So this takes into account not just the crash history, but also the risk. When we look at pedestrian and bicycle crashes, they tend to go really underreported. There's also just a lot lower volumes of these modes. So even though they represent a higher risk type of crash, we just don't have as high quality data about where they're happening because there aren't nearly as many walking and biking trips out there in Cherokee County today. There may also be places where people are specifically not walking and biking because it is so risky. So by looking at the risk factors, this allows us to try to capture that piece of the puzzle as well. Next slide. So this gave us the initial high injury network that you're seeing on the screen here today. The darker red scored higher, which means it scored more of those 5 criteria on the previous slide, also shown here in the table. So this is any road that qualified in at least one of those 5 categories. This gave us a network that was kind of a little too large when you look at how other counties and municipalities identify their high injury networks. They tend to identify about 10% of roads. So in order to further filter this list down, we looked at a set of equity criteria. So these are our additional 5 criteria. So we looked at the Justice 40 census tracts. This is a data set developed by the federal government to identify historically disadvantaged communities. Vehicle ownership, so where there are places where people don't own a vehicle and need better access to non-driving modes. Age, so where there are people who are over the age of 65. Income, so below the poverty level, and then race, so where there are concentrations of non-white residents. So next slide, that gave us the refined high injury network. And so this is about 12% of Cherokee County's roads. The scores that you're seeing here correspond to the 5 safety criteria, and anything that was carried through here from the previous set was something that qualified in at least 3 of those 5 equity criteria. So this gives us not just a set of roads that is unsafe and risky, but also where there is a higher need. You'll notice that this incorporates most of the county's major state routes. I-575 is on here, State Route 20, State Route 92. So that being said, this will certainly require lots of coordination with state and federal agencies to make any improvements on these roads. We have also made sure that each of the municipalities represented in Cherokee County gets some representation on the high injury network so that each municipality can kind of have their own list of priorities to move forward with. Next slide. So we're going to jump into the policies and programs a little bit. For anyone who's not familiar, county and citywide policies and programs are really, they're kind of an umbrella. It's not just where there's engineering and implementation happening, but the policies and the programs are intended to really touch everything across the county. So they weaved safety into the decision-making and implementation across the county. Next slide. So we're going to walk through a handful of example policies and programs here, and then you'll have an opportunity to give us some feedback via the Mentimeter poll that we started earlier. So these are development policies related to how projects are identified across the county. So through the project selection process to review project prioritization and capital programming processes to ensure that the high crash locations are prioritized. Number 2 is a rural road safety program. So this would involve monitoring a lot of the rural roadways, especially in the high growth areas, to proactively address the safety concerns related to new development and the new traffic that brings. The 3rd is a speed management program. So this would look at all of the roads across Cherokee County to establish target speeds for the roadways, and then identify any major steps that need to be taken to get the driving speeds closer to that target speed. Next up, we have your poll. So if everyone could take back out their devices and give us your feedback on which you think would be the most beneficial versus the least beneficial. And if anybody lost the poll or who didn't join before would like to rejoin, you can go to menti.com, menti.com, and input the code you see on the screen here, 79264405. Anyone's having technical challenges, feel free to put that in the chat and we can help troubleshoot. Or if you're not participating in the poll, feel free to just put any thoughts in the chat box as well. All right, we got at least one participant. Thank you.
Yeah. And I was going to note, it does require you press submit on this type of question, I believe. So if you've answered them, make sure you hit submit.
All right, so we're seeing overall the responses. I think it would be beneficial, definitely for the mostly the speed management program. That's definitely one that's come up a lot in our conversations with the stakeholders. So we'll definitely agree with that. Got a few more responses trickling in here. Give folks another couple seconds and then. All right. All right, so the next type of policy is for design. So once projects have been selected, how are those projects actually designed? First one is context-based design standards. So instead of really giving the whole county the same treatment when it comes to design guidance, we would look at specific land uses and specific context areas, similar to how, a zoning code looks at what's the context of the area and has specific requirements based on that. Similarly for the road design projects. Second would be for land development criteria. So this would really be looking at the development review process and the criteria there to encourage new development to address safety needs. So trying to make sure that any of the new subdivisions or developments that are happening are addressing potential safety concerns, either that are there today or that might be created by the new traffic. Third, countermeasure guidelines. So developing some guidance on where, when, and how to implement the safety countermeasures. And finally, intersection control evaluation. So this would be sort of a automatic mandate review of alternative intersection treatments anytime a new traffic signal is being requested. So if you want a new traffic signal, it's essentially requires you to also look at, well, would a roundabout work here? Something that has objectively better safety outcomes. Is that a possibility here? And third type is deliver projects. So this is really how those projects are constructed. First is goes with projects. This would be a process to identify and incorporate safety countermeasures into existing capital and maintenance projects. So trying to find opportunities where there is not a necessarily large added cost or, time investment, being able to incorporate better safety countermeasures into these projects. Second one is rapid response and quick build programs. So creating a program to rapidly deploy lower cost countermeasures at high priority locations. All right, so we'll ask you all to take out your devices again and tell us what you think about those proposed policy programs. All right, so again, first response here thinks the land development criteria is most beneficial. I think that's consistent really with what we're seeing with our stakeholder input as well. And it's a really good time to be doing that actually, because the county is just about to kick off a review and rewrite of the Unified Development Ordinance. So this is a really great opportunity to kind of, piggyback off of this effort and move directly into implementation there. Guidelines for the safety measures is also coming in ranked pretty high. So finding ways when and where those safety countermeasures should be implemented. It's a great one. All right, we'll give folks another couple seconds. Right. And then, of course, there's non-infrastructure policies. So that first set we looked at, those were really things that impact infrastructure directly. These are things that would sort of have other direct impacts, things that can influence behavior, decision-making. So the first one is developing a vulnerable road user ordinance. So drafting a countywide and citywide ordinances that afford additional protections to vulnerable road users and or increased penalties for drivers at fault in those types of crashes. Second one, developing a speed limit reduction ordinance on local roads. So drafting a countywide and citywide ordinance to decrease the default speed limit on local roads. This is a really popular solution in a lot of the communities that have had the biggest success with moving towards their Vision Zero goals, is doing I'm sure people have heard about sort of a citywide 25-mile-per-hour ordinance. So the default becomes 25 instead of 30 or even 35 miles per hour on local roads. Third policy here is support expanded automated speed enforcement legislation. So advocating for legislation that would allow the expansion of automated speed enforcement in areas outside of school zones in the Georgia legislature. So this is something that is not allowed currently at the state level. And we know even the automated speed enforcement in school zones can be somewhat controversial, but definitely another way to target those high priority areas without adding extra burden on already strained enforcement resources. So we'll go ahead and ask you to tell us what you think once again. So now we're asking you to rank these three from the most impactful to the least impactful overall. And I think the way this question works, the first one you tap is going to be your first. And then you hit submit at the end. All right. Got some results trickling in here. So developing that vulnerable road user ordinance. Definitely an important one. And that, I will say, that one is very aligned with the federal goals of supporting the vulnerable users as described in the Safe Streets for All program. Okay. We also have law enforcement policies, so we can establish an enforcement and engineering working group. This gives enforcement and engineering staff a regular standing opportunity to get together and coordinate on what the biggest safety issues are, so that the engineering staff, the people who are really making those key decisions and pushing the development of infrastructure projects, can stay connected to really what's happening on the roads today. Second, align enforcement activities with the safety action plan recommendations. So targeting those high visibility traffic enforcement activities in the high injury network in particular. Finally, installing red light safety cameras. So installing red light safety cameras along the high injury network and at high crash locations, and considering using fines to fund those safety improvements. So again, we're asking you to tell us what you think about those three options. So this time we're asking you to allocate resources to each of these. So if you really like one of them and you're not a fan of the other two, you can go 100%. If you like all three of them, you can do a third to each. Just kind of getting a sense of your level of investment in each of these ideas. While we're waiting for that to come in, I just want to acknowledge Steve's comment in the chat. We have a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit on Main Street. my view, the issue is the infrastructure allows drivers to speed. There is law enforcement presence, but generally drivers carry too much speed. That's a great point, Steve. Yeah, it's often the roadway design is really the main challenge. And so that roadway design is going to be the thing that has the biggest impact for every person who uses the roadway, and really getting people to behave the way you want them to through design is a big part of this process. So, all right, we're seeing about highest allocation of resources to aligning enforcement activities with the safety action plan activities. So that's great. And then about a quarter each to the enforcement and engineering working group and the red light safety cameras. And then finally, there's educational programs. So as Ansley mentioned in the input we've gotten so far, the educational programs are a really big part of what people want to see here. So first, keeping citizens informed of the construction projects. So helping people understand what the funding is going towards doing. You know, these construction projects, they last a really long time. People have to sit in traffic while they're happening. So trying to better communicate that to people so they can also understand what the safety improvements are going to be. Having a community presence at community events to promote safety awareness and how everyone plays a role in the safe system approach. So really educating the public about how individuals can make a difference. Providing training for teen drivers as well as older drivers. We've heard in particular for the teen drivers that there used to be some programs with the high school students, and those have sort of lost interest and investment by some of the people who ran them. And so looking at potentially, revisiting those and giving them new life. And then promoting campaigns that encourage people to think twice before taking risky action. So again, helping people understand their decision making and the role that plays in the overall safety system. All right, so one more time, asking you to share what you think here. We'll give everyone a minute to get back on the poll and let us know what they think about these 4 educational programs. All right, so coming in first is promoting campaigns focused on safe driving behavior. Overtaken by providing trainings for teen drivers and older drivers. All right, that's 2. All right, so we're getting a lot of movement here, showing a lot of support overall. Tied for first and second is promoting campaigns focused on safe driving behavior and using social media, print media. All right, this is great. Thanks, everyone. So we'll give folks just a couple minutes here to, if you want to drop in anything else that you think is needed. If it's maybe you've seen something that another community is doing that you think is really would be great for Cherokee, maybe even if you don't know what the policy or program might be, if there's sort of an issue that you've identified that's sort of a non-infrastructure issue that you see is important, feel free to drop a comment in here. We'll definitely take that, incorporate that into our recommendations.
While you're working on that, I'll note Irene shared a comment in the Zoom chat about traffic on Trickham Road and Highway 92 is ridiculous. People going through red lights constantly where there's police presence need to slow down. Educational actions are not going to be beneficial as most everyone is too busy to attend. Thank you for that input.
Yeah, and Irene, to that point, the Vision Zero campaign, just really, this national campaign focused on getting to zero traffic fatalities. They're really focused more on those. It's the decision making process and the factors that are going to affect how people behave on the road itself. So an education campaign, like you said, might be important, but is only as effective as the number of people you can get to participate. So that's definitely something that is coming up as part of kind of the national conversation about roadway safety, as well as being incorporated into this process. Getting some good comments here. Presence of speed detection devices, best deterrent. We need to encourage the public, especially in congested areas, to be more mindful of pedestrian crosswalks. Not well lit and dangerous for people. Need more sidewalks. I cannot walk or bike outside my neighborhood without fear. So absolutely, that's so challenging when you can't leave your neighborhood. Getting on the main roads, too dangerous. Education for policymakers, absolutely. Engineering, infrastructure such as roundabouts. Yeah, roundabouts are a big favorite among the safety planning, because they are a lot safer than sort of traditional intersections. Clarifying what drivers should do. Yeah, so there you go. That's that kind of education component that people need. And a lot of these different crossing types, we're getting some of these different kinds of pedestrian beacons coming in. Some people are just kind of unfamiliar with what to do when they approach them. Turn lanes on busy roads where homes are present. It's great. All right. I think let's jump to our last section here. So I'm going to pass things over to Richard, who's going to kind of walk us through some of our project locations so far.
Richard, I apologize. Your audio is coming across muffled. I'm not sure.
No, it's the same. Oh, that seems better.
Okay, maybe I'm.
Oh, yeah, you're better now.
Okay, yeah, I don't know what I did. I'll just move a little closer here. Maybe that'll help out. Some might be my connection. But good. Just talking a little bit about the project development process. And again, my name is Richard Fangman with Pond and Company, part of the project team, looking at some of the engineering aspects in project development. And one things we'll do is we're identifying those project areas. We're trying to target 15 of the high priority segments and intersections within the high injury network. We'll show you a little bit about how we did that. Again, evaluating that crash history. So at those locations, we've been taking a deeper dive into the crash history data to identify specific types of crashes at each location. And then we're applying safety countermeasures. So using the FHWA filter tool and Atlanta Regional Commission guidance to identify the range of appropriate countermeasures. So the idea there is, what is a measure that can be put in place that's not just something we think up, but something that's actually been proven in other locations to help with that particular type of safety issue. So that's part of that process. And then the next slide kind of shows within that high injury network that Kat and Ansley showed earlier, we've taken and looked at those 15 sort of top locations for intersection and segment improvement needs, and have developed some more work on that. And I'm not going to go through all 30 of those, but I was going to try to kind of hit the top 10 list. I'll spend a little more time on the first few, and then we'll go through the others a little more quickly, but want to just give you an idea of that. Also, you can view all of these at the interactive online map that we have. So I don't know if any of you have participated earlier on in the process. You were able to drop pins on a map and show us where you thought challenges were and all that. Our team has been using that data, and we thank you for that. Another part of that then is to, oh, I'm sorry, somebody's saying they can't hear me. Is that true, Kat? That's a problem there?
I I think that was just from before. I think you're good now.
Okay, all right. Something must be happening with my connection here. So I'll just keep going, and you stop me if I'm not able to be heard, Kat, and we'll figure something else out here. But if you view the projects on this interactive map, you can go there and see now what our project recommendations are, those different locations, so you can get an idea of where that's headed and provide comments via that link. So if you wanted to scan that or take a picture of that image, you'll have that to be able to go to. We'll go through a few. First of all, safety countermeasures. Again, we've looked at these FHWA, Federal Highway Administration. They have a list of proven safety countermeasures, and that initiative was used to collect these 28 sort of countermeasures and strategies that we think are most appropriate in the county, and look at where those can be applied. That's basically what that said. And so just to hit some of the different areas, and some of these are ones that have come up in the chat so far today, at least the one near Trickham Road. You can see there's a few things that are kind of near that 92 and Trickham Road that we'll be talking about. But this is the section of State Route 92 from I-575 to Main Street. And some of the predominant collision types there are actually side swipes in the same direction and roadway departure crashes. And a lot of those side swipes in the same direction really involving a lot of the weaving and movements that are occurring as people go to and from the interstate. So some of the potential countermeasures are looking at speed management in that area. Also, roadside design improvements. Are there things we can do to make the roadside more forgiving so that if someone does leave the roadway, they've got a little more of a clear zone there. Also looking at things like pavement marking improvements, rumble strips and rumble stripes that you can put down the edge of the road to make sure that people know when they're getting to that edge of the road. It sort of gives you that warning that you're getting right at the edge there. And then also things for pedestrians, like leading pedestrian crossing phases at major signalized intersections along the corridor. This one, and actually everything from there up to Trickham, really is a fairly high pedestrian section of activity. And so making sure that those intersections are able to get, if you do a leading pedestrian interval, what that does is when all the traffic is stopped, it lets the walk signal go first and gets those pedestrians to start on their crossing, so vehicles can see them, be aware of them before they start moving the complementary phases for the vehicles. So that's some stuff on that one, some of the aspects of that. Then continuing on towards Main Street, you're seeing more crashes with left turn angle crashes, rear ends, and again, similarly, side swipes in the same direction. You see that when you have really busy arterials where you have a lot of lane changing activity and a lot of people that are trying to move around. And so again, trying to organize and slow that flow are some of the best things you can do. But looking at, again, roadside design improvements, but also those things related to markings and to these rumble stripes can help. Another thing we looked at here is looking at some reduced conflict type of intersection improvements along this stretch. You can put in things like median U-turn type intersections, or intersections called restricted crossing U-turn intersections, where basically you've taken some of the movements out of the intersection to make it a little simpler, and it helps with the capacity intersection, but it also helps a lot with safety and flow through those intersections to make it more organized, and also protects pedestrians from some of the conflicts that they have when they're at a standard intersection. So we'll move on to the next one, because again, I want to step through these fairly quickly to be respectful of your time and make sure we get some comments from you at the end. And also there's more detail there, but here it is, State Route 92 and Trickham Road. That's definitely one of the more challenging intersections there. A lot of rear ends and left angle crashes there. So one thing there is looking at some of these yellow change intervals. Can we lengthen some of those intervals? Can we make some of those signal movements more of a protected movement where some of those movements are permissive? In other words, you can go on the flashing yellow or just yellow light. I'll get those to be more protected. So looking at those intervals, again, this is a location where simplifying the operations with one of those U-turn or median U-turn type of intersection treatments may be helpful. Again, some of the other things below you've heard before, just refreshing those pavement markings, making sure that we've got good pavement marking and good lighting so that those intersections are very visible and people understand what they should be doing at the intersections. Because there's so many turning movements that occur across your intersections, and particularly your big busy ones, the pavement markings wear out there sooner than they do in other places. And Cherokee's starting to see that a lot. I'm sure you've seen that on a lot of your arterials where you're getting a lot more wear there, and you have to refresh those a little more frequently. So another area, again on the 92 corridor down at Bell's Ferry Road, predominant collision type there are some rear end crashes and left angle crashes, and some potential countermeasures there are things like looking at corridor access management. How do we manage those access points where we may have several driveways in a row? Are there places that we can kind of take a look at that to help with those rear end collision occurrences? Again, things like looking at those yellow change intervals and permissive phases for left turning. And just things like reviewing the potential to remove the channelized right turn lanes to minimize the number of head conflicts at the intersection. So again, trying to really pay attention to pedestrians in this area. This is an area that does have a lot of pedestrian activity. We know it's another redeveloping area too that was part of one of your livable centers initiative sort of efforts out there. And so there's a lot of intentionality towards improving and enhancing walking and bikeability there, but we also recognize that a lot of that is happening. So those types of improvements that are related to making that intersection safer for pedestrians. Another one, State Route 92 from Bell's Ferry to Lovejoy Lane. So that section of State Route 92, has a lot of angle crashes and road departure crashes. And actually, it's sad to report that there have been 2 fatalities along that stretch of road with people actually leaving the roadway and running into some of the things on the side. There are more trees that are close on the side of the roadway there in some sections than others. You got some of that mixture of commercial, but also a few stretches of wooded roads. I know one of the crashes, I think, was run off the road into like one of those kind of more wooded areas. So looking at things like potential countermeasures with roadway design improvements that would help. You can see that also just from this map here, there's some sharp curves in there. So can we look at some of that curvature and look at how that combines with areas that might have run off the road crash potential to make sure that we're protecting those areas with either guardrail or clear zones on the side of the road. So those are some of those basic kinds of things you do in that type of a section. Again, looking at some of those reduced conflict U-turns, or even what they call a super street concept, where you take several of the intersections and you convert some of those intersections into those sort of U-turning signalized, but U-turning type of intersections, and allowing left and signalized U-turns. Then look, and we've skipped over several of these when you look here, because again, we're trying to look, I said the top 10, these are sort of 10 illustrative ones, so you can see some of the differences. You saw along State Route 92, some of the very different types of improvements that they had that we have there, even though those are somewhat similar sections. And then 575 from Riverstone Parkway to Canton Highway to Fate Connector Road. This is basically a section that's it's suburban, but it's definitely getting a little more towards a rural section there, and it's a section of I-575. So one of the challenges there as you get on that northern part of I-575 with that curvature there is that road departure. So taking a look at enhanced signage and pavement markings and how those can be used to make sure that area of the freeway is operating well. So. Riverstone Parkway from 140 to Reinhardt College Boulevard. That's an area that has angle head-on and rear end collisions, but also an area that's very active for pedestrian traffic. And so making sure that we're doing things for those for speed management, access management, and even things like vegetation trimming, where we've noticed there's some vegetation overhanging some of the signage and things like that along that section of the road. Also looking at potential mid-block crossing opportunities, particularly 92 at Lakeview Drive and others to connect the path system to Etowah River Park. So again, all of those things we talked about too with those intersections for safety, things like leading pedestrian intervals, making sure you have good lighting, but also doing those, being intentional in where we have these additional crossings could help there. Also, speed management. That road is very big and wide open. So when we say speed management, there's a whole lot of things that can fall into that category to try to control what's going on with, with speed there. Reinhardt 148 Reinhardt College Parkway. Again, here rear ends and left angle collisions. This is getting to one of those intersections. It's definitely in the more suburban end of the spectrum there. But again, yellow, looking at those changing intervals and the phasing that we have at those intersections versus those left turn collisions is important with enhanced signing and marking and stuff. Also, advanced overhead warning signs for that intersection, because of some of the visibility could be important as well. One or two more, and then we'll let you. We'll move on. One here that we wanted to kind of showcase because it really kind of shows more of that rural condition on the road, where you have some roads here in the county that you probably saw on our network, our overall network, where they're windy. They are actually much more of a rural road kind of condition, and road departures are really a factor on some of those roads. And this is, kind of coming up into Waleska. This is kind of getting to that. And so really looking at speed management, advanced signage, even things like edge lit chevrons. So where you have areas where you're maybe not lighting the entire road. How do we make sure that if someone comes into an area where they really have to look at the, look at the curvature and react to the curvature of the road, you can making sure putting these chevrons in is one step, but another step further than that is to have some of those with edge lighting on there. And you can have that edge lighting that'll come on if someone's approaching at a speed that's too fast. That way it kind of really draws attention to that as an active kind of warning device for people who are speeding on those areas with sharp curvature. So again, fixing the curvature would be great, but sometimes those are longer term projects. What are the things that we can do to try to handle that? So we'll move on. I think we might have one or two. This may be the last one. I don't know. But for this group, and again, just north of Ball Ground, from 372 or on 372 from Roberts to Appalachian Highway. Again, a lot of left angle crashes. This one unfortunately had a lot of fatalities. This is a very really lit up as far as being a stretch that needs attention. There were 2 fatalities with left angle crashes and actually a roadway departure fatality in this area. So we're paying a lot of attention to this, even though it's a little further down on what I mentioned here today. It's definitely not far down on our minds and on what we're trying to do to improve safety. So, looking at speed management along that road, particularly that southbound direction where you have some grade issues with they're affecting speed. Also looking at a road die between the eastbound and westbound ramps. So how do we kind of reduce some of the numbers of lanes in areas where that might be helpful? But also alternative intersection designs, looking at a single lane roundabout at some of the locations, one of the locations there to the northern end of the corridor. So trying to look at speed management, and those types of improvements are really important, I think, in that area. So anyway, I know we went through a whole lot, but are there any, if there are locations that you say, wow, this is a high safety risk, I can't believe you didn't talk about that location, we'd love to hear about those. Hopefully it's one we're already got on our list, but if not, we'd love to hear and make sure we're looking at things that are really important to know.
Yeah, and I realize, just want to acknowledge that we are at our 7 o'clock. So if anyone does need to drop off, just want to say thank you all for your time. We'll stay on for a few minutes to see what kind of results we get on this question, and to answer any questions and answers. We can stay on for another couple of minutes.
Yeah.
We also have our again, I'll put in a plug for our website. If anyone has other thoughts as you're driving around the county tomorrow, if you think of something else that you didn't have on top of your mind tonight, feel free to drop your comments in there, send an email to Ansley, her email is on there, and we will get that incorporated into our notes. So yeah, seeing State Route 140 in East Cherokee. Yep. Yeah, we've
75 at the town lake, but yeah, that town lake is.
That's definitely
That
Big
is
hot
a
spot.
tough location. Well, thanks. If anyone else has any others you'd want to put in the chat for, oh, good, there's someone. No problem.
I see Prominence Point, Parkway residential area. Speeding through downtown Woodstock. Yep, that's definitely good to know and one that to kind of take a look at there. You know, Main Street was mentioned earlier.
This is good. I think this is a time too to remind everybody too that when we're looking at this, we've got some very specific improvements that'll be at different areas of this high injury network. But also one of the results of this that you'll be seeing as we get even further in the documentation is that programmatic area. And so you saw Kat had mentioned several of those different programs. So the idea here is that you know that the county is really going to look at, you know, on a continuing and regular basis at all of these locations that are along the high injury network, and that there'll be, you know, more things that get improved over time there. Not everything will be a, you know, a top priority intersection or segment at this stage, but the idea is to get a whole process in place to be continually looking at these and bringing them forward into to improvements.
Yeah, and Irene, great question in the chat. Any actions planned to curb the growth before so many traffic issues? That's definitely something in looking at that, the policies related to the land development ordinance. So trying to figure out, you know, one issue that came up with our stakeholders recently is that the review process, the way the code is written currently, it really looks at individual projects and the immediate roadway they're adjacent to. It really looks at that project kind of in a vacuum, you know, looking at what are the existing traffic counts today, as opposed to what are the existing traffic counts plus all of the other developments that were approved, you know, down the road or a couple neighborhoods down. And so that's one thing we'll be looking at is a more comprehensive way for the county to look at the development review to understand what else is coming. And then I think the other policy that would be a big one for understanding the growth there is doing monitoring the rural roads. So a lot of the rural roads that are, you know, they're kind of operating fine today. Maybe they're these kind of narrow 2-lane roads that are operating fine with the lower traffic volumes that you have today. But as you get more people out there, you know, coming around these curves with a higher frequency, that's something that the county needs to monitor. So there's certain monitoring programs that will be recommended to look at that. And that's one thing that's kind of cool about this Safe Streets for All program that the Federal Highway Administration is doing is it's not just education, it's not just engineering, it's not just policies, it's really a full kind of long-term implementation program and getting county staff, city staff, enforcement staff, everyone on board to kind of create this long-term monitoring program. Question from Clara, what communication resources do you use to inform people about these surveys, et cetera? Ansley, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we've worked closely with the county and cities communications teams to get the word out through various mechanisms, social media, newsletters, press releases that go into the newspaper as well. And then print, we have, when we had the survey going on this summer, we have had business cards and handouts that we took to our events. And I also left several of those handouts at the county's offices. And so various ways we try to get the word out.
Yeah, big question,
yeah,
Clara.
That's a great question. Thank you.
All right. Well, unless there's any other questions, we'll let everyone go for the evening. Thank you all again so much for your time. Please do take another look at our website if you want to take a closer look at our projects and stay up to date on our progress. Our email is on there as well if you have other questions or thoughts that come up. So thank you all again and have a great evening.